Hello folks, welcome to Spencer's Bookshelf. I am Spencer and I'm excited to be doing my 8th episode on my YouTube channel. And today I'm actually really excited because I'm going to be reviewing a book by someone I think is one of the greatest Canadians and someone who has inspired me in terms of being into politics, and I just think is a great person. And that is Lincoln Alexander, the Honorable Lincoln Alexander. And his memoir is the book I'm going to be doing today, and it's Go to School, You're a Little Black Boy. So firstly, before I go into the book, I am wanting you to subscribe and like, as I want to grow this YouTube channel. I want to get people reading. I want to get people's minds expanded. I want people to learn more about themselves and grow within themselves. And that's what reading does. And on my show today, I want you guys to pay actually a little bit of extra attention, because this is a book that I think, especially as a Canadian, a lot of us should read. And this is history that I think a lot of us should know. So firstly, I want to go into a bit of detail about who Lincoln Alexander is. As this book is a memoir, this book is really a chronological book about his life. But I also want to go into some of the feelings and things like that that are important to me in terms of what Lincoln did, and also to his personality, and how I think that especially if you're from Ontario, and you know who Lincoln Alexander is, you don't know him just as for what he did. You know him because he's an amazing person, and his personality was bigger than even his accomplishments. And that's why he was a very influential person. So firstly, briefly before I start, Lincoln Alexander is the first black member of Parliament and the first black cabinet minister, and also the first black lieutenant governor of Ontario. But let me go into a little more detail. So those are some of the highlights, but let's talk about Link. And that's what his nickname was Link. When people called him or came up to him and said, "Hello, Honorable Lincoln Alexander," he's like, "Just call me Link." And that exemplifies everything about him. So Link, he was born 1922, grew up in Toronto. His parents were from the Caribbean. He graduated from McMaster University in politics and economics, and that's exactly what I did, just about 45 years after. And he was an Air Force pilot, part of the Royal Air Force. Never actually went to Europe, but trained actually in Winnipeg, and was set to go to Europe if World War II kept going. But fortunately, fortunately, the war was ended before he would have had to been shipped off. But being a black pilot in the Canadian Air Force is definitely also a huge accomplishment in itself. So after being in the Air Force, he got into law school at Osgoode Law School at University of Toronto, and York, one of the two, doesn't matter. It's either York or Toronto. And basically graduated. He was also, when you look at the pictures of him graduating, he's the only person of color in the pictures itself, which is a testament to the time and a testament to him persevering and being a pioneer within the legal community in Toronto and in Canada. He then had a hard time getting started as a lawyer in Toronto, even having a very Osgoode Hall is one of the best law schools in Canada. So generally, you're going to be getting a job on Bay Street or like at a major law firm right off the bat. But he had a hard time, and it shows the racism at that time. And that's something he documents a lot in the book itself. He then moved to Hamilton where he got started in a law firm there, and it was a small law firm, and started building up, and he became a fairly influential lawyer over time in his young legal career, and did a lot of house transactions, things like that. But then in 1968, he decided, actually 1965 initially, he decided to do a little career change and decided to run for Parliament for the Progressive Conservatives in Hamilton West riding. In 1965, he didn't quite win. I mean, Hamilton is a pretty blue-collar place. It's very liberal or NDP. It's not known to be a progressive conservative area. But in 1968, he surprised everyone. And think of it this way. This is when there was Trudeau mania. This is when the Liberals were just sweeping the country. And you have this black Canadian lawyer in Hamilton running for the Progressive Conservatives and being one of the only seat pickups across the country. That's incredible. And that's amazing. So he was in Parliament for 12 years, served from 1968 to 1980. During the time, the leader of the Conservative Party, or Progressive Conservative Party, was Robert Stanfield up until 1976, and Link was a huge supporter of Stanfield, who is a very moderate Progressive Conservative from Halifax. Almost was Prime Minister. Stanfield lost one of the elections by 2 seats. If he got those 2 extra seats, I'm sure in Canadian history he would be seen a lot higher than what he was. But in 1976, a young buck named Joe Clark, 36 years old, ran for the leadership in one of the Progressive Conservatives, and then ran against Pierre Trudeau in 1979 and won. He won a minority government, and guess who he appointed the Minister of Labour? Lincoln Alexander. And that's what made Link the first, not only the first black MP, but the first black cabinet minister. And Minister of Labour is a pretty prominent role. Like, there's a lot of, especially in Canada now, but it's even more so in Canada during that time period, because labor movements were much stronger. And as a MP coming from Hamilton, where you have the steel mills and just tons of manufacturing and a lot of different industries within there, it was awesome to see Lincoln Alexander become the cabinet minister and the Minister of Labour in the government. So as Joe Clark's government was a minority government, they kind of they made a little mistake in 1980, and on a budget bill, if you're not familiar with minority governments, there's what are called votes of non-confidence, and there was a budget bill. The budget bill, for some reason, the whip in the for the Conservatives in the House of Commons couldn't count, and the opposition had enough votes to take down the government. And what that meant was there was an election. Trudeau came back, won a majority, and Joe Clark was out, which meant Lincoln Alexander was not in government anymore. I mean, he was still an MP, but he was no longer in cabinet. So he actually decided, you know what, I'm going to retire from politics, and actually took a job as head of the Workers' Compensation Board, which is a very covenant job within Canada, especially it's a very important job as well. And he did that for up until 1984, and then Brian Mulroney gave him a call one day and said, Link, how would you like to be the Lieutenant Governor of the province of Ontario? Probably the second most prominent heads of government within Canada. It is a ceremonious role, the Governor General being the top, but there's lieutenant governors all across the provinces, which are equivalent roles for the province. But this is the one for Ontario, which is definitely a very prominent role. And Link said yes. And throughout the late 80s and up into the 90s, he was Ontario's Lieutenant Governor, which is awesome. In that role, he would represent the Queen, heads of state that came into the country. Think about it. This is the 80s. And you have heads of state coming from different countries going to meet Mulroney or whoever the leaders in the government are. But generally, it's the lieutenant governor of whatever province they're in that meets them first. And the first sight a world leader will have during the 80s or late 80s when they were coming into Canada and meeting a government official was Lincoln Alexander. And that's amazing. So he did that, and then that was his. After that, he was president of Guelph University, and then retired after that, after a very illustrious career. Link is he has a highway named after him. So the freeway that goes through Hamilton, the expressway I think it is now called the Lincoln Alexander Parkway, and that just shows the influence and amazingness that he was to Hamilton and to the province of Ontario and the government of Canada. So I want to talk a bit about some of the stuff that I felt in the book itself. So that's who he is. But I think there's almost, even though he had such an amazing career and he was such an amazing influence, there was something even more that Lincoln Alexander had. And it's something that I always knew because I followed him. I think if you're from Ontario, you know who Lincoln Alexander is. You may not know if you're Manitoban or somewhere else in Canada, but if you're from Ontario, you don't know who Lincoln Alexander is, well, you don't know much. But the thing about him is it was not only success, but his personality and his personableness. One thing about Lincoln Alexander is he would go and meet everyone. When he was a constituent, he was riding the bus all the time, talking to everyone. He was getting to know people. He was going into he was that retail politician times 10. And it wasn't because he was trying, or just because he was trying to win. Obviously, he's wanting to get votes and things like that. But he had a genuine he genuinely wanted to get to know people. He genuinely, especially in such a multicultural country, he wanted to get to know different groups of people. And in the book itself, Link talks a lot about racism that he's felt, and a lot of times racism that he would hear from some of his closest friends. But the thing about Link is he was such a likable guy that what he would do is if someone said something that was inappropriate or he just wasn't right, he wouldn't go at it like this person's an idiot. He would educate, and he would do it in such a nice way. And because Link was generally liked by everyone, like you had to be like the world's worst person to not like Link. He was able to change a lot of hearts and minds on a lot of things. And the thing too is another thing to his amazing character. He was a staunch progressive conservative. He's a moderate. During that time period, most progressive conservatives were moderate conservatives. There wasn't a huge differentiation between the liberals and conservatives at that time. But he was staunchly loyal. He loved Stanfield. He loved Mulroney. He loved Joe Clark. He's always been on that side. But one of his best friends, and he would say probably his best friend, was a guy by the name of David Peterson. Who is David Peterson? The left-leaning, liberal, provincial premier in Ontario through the mid to late 80s itself. They used to go for drinks all the time. They were just like close buddies. And that just shows, I think, something that we forget these days, especially in the days where there's so much partisanship, there's so much negativity, there's so much distance between people. Really, there probably isn't. It's just people don't know. And when people got to know Link, they loved him so much that some of their underlying prejudice were probably questioned just by the fact that this man was an amazing person. So I don't know. I think that Lincoln Alexander is someone that we should all get to know a bit more of. I think that as Canadians, we do celebrate him. We have Lincoln Alexander Day. I forget what day that is, but it is part of our. It was enacted in 2014, just after his passing. That we have a day to celebrate him. But he was just someone that our country should be proud of, and we should really celebrate, because there's so many more Lincoln Alexanders out there. And if someone can be inspired to be like him, we would have an amazing country. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're black, white, or any other race, gender, anything. Just to be like a person like him would make our country a better place. So from the book itself, I'm just going to talk about what I think of the actual writing and things like that. It was perfect. I can't say anything bad about it. I've actually read this twice. And I actually liked it the second time even more, because there's so many other little nuggets that you get out of it, and I love little Link nuggets, and I think that he is one of my heroes, and reading this book only made it more so. So on that note, I'm giving this book a 5 out of 5, and it's going to be probably one of my only 5-star ratings, but on the way in which this book is written, on the interestingness of his life and the way in which he describes that, because of these times where we have a lot of tension as a result of discrimination and things like that, I think reading the biography of one of the greatest, or autobiography of one of the greatest, I think, black politicians ever, makes this book a 5-star rating. And I think even beyond that, we need to celebrate him more. Lincoln Alexander is an amazing, amazing Canadian. Anyways, folks, thank you so much. This is one of my favorite episodes. I love Link. I think he's the best. And I will see you next time on Spencer's Bookshelf.